By the way, back in town. I'm going to try to do something on my end real quick. Just keep it live, though. By the way, Benedict, the lives are on YouTube. They're on upcoming, so you could actually share the live stream beforehand. All right. Now we're back to the actual podcast. Welcome to the Manufacturing Come Up. I'm Malachi Greb, your host, and today we have an awesome guest, Vlad Romanov. I probably didn't pronounce it right again for like the 10th time that we tried to get this right, but Vlad has one of the best educational courses for like PLC platforms, and I think they're even navigating to the robotics side of things as well. So welcome to the show, Vlad.
Thank you for having me, Malachi. Really appreciate it.
No problem. We're glad to have you.
How are you doing today? How's everything going on your side?
Things are well. Things are well. Busy. How about you?
Busy as well. As you mentioned, Solus PLC has been growing. We're slowly expanding. We've brought in a robotics expert, so we're looking to sort of create more content on that side. I know that there's been a lot of growth in that industry, right? As you probably know very well, in 2022, I think we had the record purchase of robotics in automation. And so there's certainly a demand, both from an automation standpoint, from a technical standpoint, but also from a training standpoint. I think manufacturers are trying to bring up their maintenance staff primarily to be able to, at the very least, service, what's been put in place by integrators.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I couldn't make the commitment to help you out with the robotic side.
It's very difficult, right? Like I think there's so much work to be deploying these systems, to be commissioning them, to be designing like robotic cells, palletizing, case packing, you name it, right? So I'm certainly, how to say it, we're also struggling to find people to cover that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think people on the back end, they don't know how much like energy and whatnot goes into making some of these technical videos. Like a sit down and giving people information video is fairly quick to sit down. Like perfect example is like your podcast versus like one of your PLC training videos. Like the difference is like maybe there's an extra 15 minutes on the podcast or something. On the PLC training video, it might be a 15-minute video that took 2 to 6 hours to get prepared.
Exactly. And, I'm always very open in having conversations. I know that there's a lot of people in our industry that are starting to create more content, and I'm more than happy to share like the full stack and things that I do at the very least to get through that process, because I know that there is a learning curve. And as you said, it takes sometimes 6 hours, sometimes like a full day, right? Because I also need to, I don't know everything at the top of my head, so I need to go back and dig in and like understand, and then create a project and then film that, then edit the video. So it takes quite a bit of effort. But anyways, I know that there's people trying to do similar like content, and I'm always more than happy to share what my process is, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said too, like anybody who's out here with expert level skills, I think it'd be good also to reach out to Vlad, and maybe it makes sense that he can have you as an instructor on one of his courses.
Absolutely. And as I told you, it's very hard to find people nowadays just because of how much work there is in automation and robotics. So obviously, a lot of us engineers want to tinker with things. So you want someone that has an interest in the technology, but also wants to do like some of the video editing, the video shoot. So that takes, I feel, like a different skill set slightly. So finding the pair of the two in a market that's paying a premium is very difficult. So
yes, absolutely. Vlad, so you also have a very good set of credentials on the academic side of things. Why don't you kind of take us back to where this all got started?
Yeah, so maybe to give you a background, of my like upbringing, at least very quickly. So
Sure.
my family has always been had the view, at least, that you need to get a degree in order to be successful in life, right? And even to some extent now, my family is still pushing me to get that PhD level. They want me to be very like educated from the
Mm.
general standpoint, right? So I picked engineering as the bachelor's of choice, and I finished that back in 2013 at Concordia in Montreal, Canada, and had the opportunity to move to the US. So the degree itself, I'll be very honest with you, didn't teach me anything about manufacturing, right? So I've certainly got the knowledge of like circuits, electronics, signals. We did a lot of math, as you would expect in a typical engineering degree, but very little on the practical side. So if I
Mm.
was maybe to, in retrospect, think back and see like what I would do differently, is I think that I didn't know what all the options were, right? So I think that in high school and in college, so here you have 2 years in college. It's like the European system in Canada. So you have a 2 year of college where you do sort of like your very basic like calculus, linear algebra to prep you for engineering school, and then you go and get 4 years of engineering. So
Oh, wow.
my point is, they didn't present us with all the options, right? Like it was more like that's the path to university. That's kind of where you're aligned to go. And obviously, they talked about like mechanical engineering, like process engineering, electrical engineering, but there was no like trades. They didn't necessarily have those maybe like workshops. And I think
Sure.
if I would have had that information at the time, I would have chosen a different path,
Yeah.
right?
No- Yeah,
Because
and
I think
also
Go ahead, go ahead.
also too, a lot of the trade things, like if you're wanting to go for like an engineering degree, it's still very, very limited on like any trade job. Let's go PLC or robot programmer, right? The amount of
Mhm.
schools that offer an engineering level degree in PLC or robot programming is very, very limited.
Sure. And I guess like now I know that there were options, right? Like I know that there's like trade schools that offer like PLC programming, and it brings you through like different steps, right? Like you understand how to wire things, you understand how to work with like VFDs, you understand like relay like logic, and I guess hardware as well. Whereas I had pretty much like none of that
Yeah.
in engineering, right? A lot of it was very like textbook based. And look, I'll be honest with you, like I can draw some parallels in the field that maybe some people who didn't do the math aspect, like they don't have that. But I
Yeah.
think it's a very small portion and in like specific scenarios, right? Like I'll give you one example. I had to scope out, I remember, a signal that was coming in from a sensor because it was too fast for the PLC to pick up. And this happened like twice in a decade worth of manufacturing. And since I had used an oscilloscope in electronics in university, then I was the only one who was like, oh yeah, like we can use an oscilloscope, and this is the signal, and we can see it. But outside of that, like I didn't know what a PLC was when I got my first like manufacturing job, right? I've never seen
Right.
a PLC. It was never mentioned to me, so you take it for what it is. And then I guess like to finalize, so I got my engineering degree, worked in the field from 2013 up until 2019. Decided to pursue of decided to pursue an MBA, and there, so I had this, how to say, like while I was working at several companies, so Procter and Gamble, Kraft Heinz, the frustration that I personally had is I didn't really understand the why, right? Like I understood that we were deploying this technology, we were trying to improve the capacity of the plant, but I didn't necessarily understand the business decisions
Mm.
that were
Yep.
made, right? Like, so we would run like a different product, and I'd be like, well, like, why are we running this product? Or like, why are we trying to increase capacity? Who's selling the product that's coming out of this plant, right? And
Yeah.
maybe it was just me, and I got really curious about the business aspects. And to be honest with you, I thought I was going to get all the answers at the MBA, and I got more questions after the MBA. So it's it certainly it gave me knowledge and kind of rounded me a little bit more on like the accounting sides and like the marketing sides, and gave me some tools. But I don't think it, how to say it, like the thoughts that I had going into an MBA were different than when I
Mhm.
got out. So
Yeah, absolutely. And like one thing with like your particular path and journey, like The credentials are very nice, and like certain individuals are like driven for the credentials. Like even though like I didn't go very far along in my curriculum or whatever in my academia, I was still very focused on like credentials, right? So like even though I graduated from like a community college with associate degrees, but so like it was like for me, I was like, what can I stack, right? So I was like, I got 2 associate degrees. I got mechanical and electrical engineering concentrations. I did, welding concentration. I did any of the like training things that I could take. Like I was taking, like I got like one of Siemens certifications. I got the Fanuc certifications, Yaskawa, right? It's like all those things. Like I was chasing, and for like the academia side of things, right? Like even though I didn't take this road of going down, I guess a traditional college path, like it was one thing that drove me to like have all these things kind of collected, all these certifications and degrees collected, like for my own self-confidence to really be competitive in the market, right? I was like, okay, if I have an associate's degree, what's going to make me more competitive? Give me 2 associate's degree. Give me a mechanical concentration. Give me an electrical concentration.
And I would comment, like Malachi, on that side, I think the certifications are a lot better in terms of content, at least in my opinion, than degrees, right? So the reason why I say that is because typically a certificate is going to be updated fairly often, right? Like every couple of years at the very least. It's going to be very specific towards a product, like whether it is hardware or software, and it
Yeah.
will be very focused on that area, right? Like versus a
Yep.
degree, again, like I told you, we would do like general electronics or general like signals and systems, but it was not very applicable for a specific device, right? So that's why
Right.
even when people ask me like, hey, maybe I'm looking to do a degree or I'm looking to do a certification, I think you can go a lot further in terms of like very applicable knowledge with the certifications that I'm seeing from many of these areas. So again, that's just my opinion. Obviously,
Yeah.
you have to make your own choices. There's also, to that same counter argument is a lot of companies still gatekeep certain positions, and I mean, you can probably find the names of the companies I'm talking about. But you would apply to the engineering position, and they would be, well, do you have an accredited engineering degree from like this school? And if you
Yep.
say like no, they're not going to even look at your resume, right? Like, and
Yep.
I think that's unfortunate, but that's just the reality of
Yeah. Yeah.
things.
That's one of the key things I advise. And like, whenever I was saying about the, uh, not technically having an engineering degree, like people have to keep that in mind. Like if you want to do like robotics and PLCs, like you might have to take some of those classes like as electives, like if you want the highest level position, because you really may need that engineering degree to like get in the doors of certain companies because of that gatekeeper.
Which is, like I said, it's a little bit unfortunate, right? Because through
Yeah.
my experience, I've seen like an operator who'd be a much better programmer just because, they're excited about the technology. They've already worked with the technology and they're looking to kind of grow in that area and could be sent to, a
Mm.
couple of weeks worth of like robotics or PLC training. And they would
Yep.
be miles ahead than an engineer coming in fresh out of university. But again, that's a whole other like tangent. That's just my opinion. So I think
Yeah.
the industry is a bit skewed, but anyways.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And also, I want to add a point too on the certification side of things. Whenever it comes to like practical skill sets, that you're better off taking these different certification classes, especially if you're going to be working with that particular product, right? If you're going into a facility and they have Allen Bradley PLCs and Fanuc robots, like if you just go and take their all the Fanuc courses you can take, all the Allen Bradley courses you can take, you're going to be even much stronger doing that than you would if you went and spent 2 years in college with the
Yep,
same
I
amount of
would
time
agree.
spent, and probably money too. I mean, even though like you look at like a week, let's just say like a week of Fanuc training, like $2,000 or something, right? Okay, that's $2,000 for 1 week. But if you break that down to look more like a college class, I mean, what would that be? That'd be almost like a half a semester of schooling,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, and I mean, look, to your point, I think education is also what you make of it to some degree, right? You have to also weigh in, maybe if you sign up to that FANUC course at your local college, right? Like you can just cruise by and get the credential, or you could actually learn quite a bit even outside of the class, right? I'm assuming you can go to
Mm,
the lab and sort of practice things, and you can learn a lot more in that span of a semester, let's say, than you would otherwise, right? And so you also need to, how to say, like, figure out what's right for you, because I think a lot of, even on the engineering side, right, what I've seen in the bachelor's level is people just kind of get the degree, right? Like they get the check mark, but they've not really applied themselves, so they come out without any, I want to say, not deep knowledge, but you know what I mean, like they
yeah,
don't come out with knowledge. So the same could be said about any kind of this training. And I think when you go to a week to FANUC, it obviously is easier because I think you're with the people that are learning FANUC. Everyone's like very passionate about it. You know, if you make that
yeah,
commitment, then usually you want to learn. Versus, I didn't feel the same way at the bachelor's level, at least in the
yeah,
education system.
yeah, absolutely. Some people don't even know exactly what they want to do, so like it's hard for them to be like, oh, this is very important.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think that is super super important because I actually took a couple years off before I actually went to college.
Mhm.
I actually went to college and then dropped out the first time. I was going to be an
Okay.
electrical lineman. Actually, I did one semester and I was like, okay, this is not the direction I want to go. Um, and so when I went back to college, right, I went. I'm a couple years in the real world as an adult, and I'm like, I'm in class. I'm with these young 18-year-old kids that just graduated 6 months ago from high school, and they're all playing around, thinking things are funny. And I remembered like my level of seriousness versus like their level of seriousness. And like there was occasions where like the kids would be like too much. And I'm like, guys, you might want to pay attention to this. You know what I mean? Because
Yep.
I went through those processes of having the real life experience and knowing the importance of it. So therefore, like me being at school, my alertness and my attention towards like what we were actually learning was much more valuable to me, and therefore I had that focus.
I think, like, look, I 100% agree with your statement. I think you need to maybe get that, I want to say, like, slap from life to kind of like put you back into high gear, because I think, when and I saw the exact same thing at the bachelor's level in engineering, right? Like, it's your first degree, you're still probably living with your parents, you're figuring things out in life. You don't really, like, when you say you don't know what you're doing in life, that's all great, but you have to make a living, right? Like, at some point you have to really
Yep.
make a career choice, a decision. And once you go out in the real world, you see that things are not as structured as school, right? Like, no one's going to tell you, here's your assignment, do this, do this, do this, and you move on to the next one. It's a lot more up to you to sort of get those opportunities and figure out like what's important. And you can always, how to say it, make maybe the wrong decision, and again just waste that time. But if you
Yep.
understand what you're putting in the time for,
Hmm.
you're focused. And I would say, like, the same thing happened to me at the master's level, right? Like, so when I did the MBA, I was paying everything out of my pocket, so I understood the value of money. I was there for a very specific purpose. Everyone there was for a very specific purpose, so everyone was paying attention, because again, it's your time, it's your money, and it's what can you do with it after, right? So whatever you miss, it's just a lost opportunity at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you still anticipating going after your PhD?
I doubt it. I
You got
really
it. Okay.
doubt it. I like, like, my viewpoint of education like changed a lot. I think, and I'll give you one example. So I always point to people who want to learn to program. There's a class by Harvard University released for free, CS50. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's for free on YouTube. It's for free like on the Harvard website. I can tell you that that programming class is like 100x better than any class that I've gotten in my university, and it's absolutely for free, right? And so,
Yeah.
barring the degree requirements of some companies, I think you can get an excellent education from a knowledge standpoint from online resources, right? And
Yeah.
once you get through that, certifications, like various credentials that are needed for you, are going to be, I think, much better than like a PhD. Unless, if
Yeah.
your goal is to become a professor, more power to you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's one thing that kind of puts us in a weird position. For individuals, like, say for instance, like if somebody wants the academia side of things, like, well, everybody would probably love to just have a PhD, right? Like, I would love to have a PhD, but like the only reason at this point I would even want something like a PhD or an MBA is the credibility of just having it, right? Like that, it's more of a status thing, right? And
Sure.
that's where like part of the challenge is now is like, and you said your perspective on schooling's changed, that realistically, like there's enough content out there. There's enough content that's affordable, or like you said, for free, that if people just put the initiative towards learning something, let's go with PLCs, right? Like if they're going to learn to program PLCs, then they can literally just spend their time. They don't have to spend money. Just spend your time and take it serious, like a college education, like a college course, and really study. Really, maybe invest in a PLC. Maybe invest in some paid courses.
Sure.
Well, I think it's also like you also have free YouTube videos. You have your paid courses and stuff like that, and those things are so powerful and can get people up to speed to where they need to be. And the industry has such a huge gap that for like PLC and robot programmers, the degree is not as much of a threshold unless you just want to get into a particular facility, right? And you go ahead.
I was going to make the comment. I think, to our industry's, how to say, like, discredit, or I guess like the unfortunate reality is that it's hard to practice with some of the software and hardware that you don't get access to, right? And I think that's one of the reasons, like, I really like what inductive automation has done with their, SCADA platform, is that it's free every 2 hours. You just need to reset it, but you get access to all the features, right? And so I'm certainly not as familiar with the robotic side of things, but I can tell you on the PLC side, it's difficult to get access to those tools. And so if you're a student just trying to get your hands on learning, let's say like Allen Bradley, Siemens, or any other platform, it becomes difficult, right? And I wish that we provided better, how to say, like, accessibility, I guess, to those who want to learn. I think Siemens has now like a 30-day trial for their like software, but I think again there should be like a student version that you can just easily deploy, and you can pass on the cost to the hardware. And anyways, I think there's different business models that I think could be more suitable to make it a better learning experience.
Yeah, and I think that like maybe a good message to companies like Allen Bradley, who as big as they are, like what I highly predict happening is somebody's going to open up the proper amount of accessibility and the proper amount of marketing and sales resources towards something, and they're going to end up dominating the market, right? In my opinion, like you look at Allen Bradley as being like one of the Goliaths of controls in the United States. In my opinion, they have two big things for them. Their product works well, and everybody knows it. And that's like the two big things. Outside of that, it's like, is it super intuitive? Is it, you know what I mean? Is your training accessible? There's like a lot of things, in my opinion, that are lacking from it. They have a good product line, but if a lot of these other things are missing, then the new people coming into the industry may not care. The guy who starts a company today, a manufacturing company today, may not necessarily care that everybody else uses Allen Bradley PLCs. You might say, well, cool, that's what they're doing, but they're charging $3,000 for their PLC. This one's charging $1,000, has free software and free training or something like that, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. And it's like I guess it's a chicken or the egg problem, right? It's you want these little guys, like Phoenix Contact, Opto 22, Omron. There's a lot of players, I think, that are gaining traction in that arena, but it becomes this challenge where, okay, they're not the biggest yet, so I'm going to learn the biggest one. But I would really like to learn on the other platform because it is free, it is easy to access, I can buy a controller. And so it's one of those things, like, it needs to be adopted to be learned, but then you're also having to learn the main platform that's in the field, so it becomes this kind of a weird lockdown that is unfortunate again, because I can tell you when I was a student, I could certainly not afford, the wall that you see behind me. There was zero
Yeah.
chance that I was able to pay for that. So it's just the unfortunate, I guess, reality. I think it will slowly change, but I think it will take time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And this is definitely kind of like a little bit of transition in topic, but I think that potentially investing in hardware and software may be a good option for people. I mean, it is unfortunate that maybe you have to pay for it, but having Allen Bradley PLC and having the Allen Bradley software, I mean, you're looking at what you can accomplish, maybe $4,000. You can get a year subscription of the software and get a PLC for roughly $4,000. It's an investment, but so is going to college and learning in those ways. Like RoboGuide, I think there's like 2,000 or 3,000 for an annual subscription, and like it's like 10,000 if you just want to buy like a one-time license. But especially like for like on the robotic side of things, that's really nice is that you get a 3D world with it. And so those platforms, you can learn a lot because you can physically see what's going on. You can go find 3D models of conveyors on the internet and download them and upload them into RoboGuide and play around with like the different software tools and playing around with it. It is the exact user interface of the Fanuc robot. So you're getting like essentially, I'm not gonna say real world experience, but you're getting direct exposure to the platform itself. And, maybe even paying for that software might be even more cost effective than going and taking like a Fanuc training course. Cause let's say, for instance, you go take a Fanuc training course, $2,000, $3,000 for a training course that's 1 week, whenever you could like potentially buy the software. And you're going to do a lot of hard learning. You're going to watch a lot of YouTube videos, and you're going to say, okay, and click some buttons, do this, do that. Why didn't that? You know what I mean? But now you have infinite amount of time. Well, 1 year, right? If you just buy like a 1 year subscription, you have 1 year of time that you can like dedicate as much potential time that you can and energy that you can put into this to understanding its user interface and understanding how to program. And if you really look at like the amount of time that you spend inside of a college class, the person with the proper amount of dedication can learn in 3 months what somebody with a 2-year degree learned if they just have like the software and they're just constantly working day and night.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And you're also cutting out some of the, I want to say, quote unquote, unnecessary materials that you're also taught outside of that core platform, right? Because at the end of the day, when you get, let's say, a job in robotics or PLC programming, you want to have a very focused like skill set, right? You don't need, we were programming like embedded systems, we were programming FPGAs, programming in assembly. I've not used any of that stuff since 2013. Right. But to your point, I think as you gain experience in the field, as you maybe like mature, also you realize that time is very valuable, right? So right now, if I was to go, and I'm just giving a hypothetical example, and want to learn guitar, there's zero chance that I'm gonna just not buy a guitar and try to watch videos and try to understand that, right? Like I would invest in a guitar, I would invest in someone who plays guitar, and I would invest in lessons with that person to get quicker to where I would like to go, right? Same could be said about sports, right? Like if I want to learn how to play tennis or golf, I would pay for those. Like I'm willing to pay so that my learning curve is shortened, right? And I'm a little bit biased, right? Because we provide education on like PLCs and several platforms, but I really think that even personally, I'm realizing that I want to pay for someone who's already done the work or the job so that I could do it quicker.
101%. Like investing in your education. Like people say this, you hear it a lot, invest in your education. And it's one of the most powerful things you can do. Like people who operate at the highest levels of success, like CEOs and stuff like that, like business owners. I mean, it's not far-fetched to spend $10, $20, $30,000 on like a week-long seminar or a direct one-on-one training with some type of consultant. Like these are not far-fetched things, and it's solely for the reason of the speed of at which you can educate yourself.
And it comes in all flavors, right? Like it's in business, it could be in marketing and sales, like whatever the skill you might need. I think I guess like I've come to the conclusion I want to spend money, talk to the right people, get the right tools, because even on the tool side, right, like you mentioned RoboGuide that you can learn and simulate very well with, and you could be watching, 100 videos on how someone's doing something in RoboGuide, but that's going to cut down to, let's say, like 10 hours, and I'm just throwing out like random
Yeah,
numbers
yeah,
out
yeah.
there, but ultimately you can very quickly, I think, gain that skill, but just having invested. So what's the value of your time, that it took to learn something in a very, how to say, like, different way? But I think, when you're young, you're hoping to, and again, you don't have maybe the funds for that, or your
Yeah.
company's not paying for it. So it becomes difficult to sometimes justify
Mhm.
that. But
Yeah.
it's just, I want to say the reality of things. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And also to add to that, like the phase at which you are in your life, right? Like
Mhm.
if you're at the very beginning, like maybe just haven't even went to college yet, or you're in college, like essentially, well, I don't want to say like your time is less valuable, but in this standpoint, like your time is less valuable, right?
Yes.
As of right now, you spend less money, spend more time. And then as you like increase in your career and everything that you're doing, you want to do the opposite, right? You want to spend less time and spend more money to accomplish those educational things.
Yeah. If I can ask you one question, Malachi, I'm curious of the
Sure.
state of robotics 2023. Are you seeing customers automating just as much? Are you seeing a reduction in purchases? Like how is the industry doing? There's again conversations of recessions. I know we've redefined what a
Yeah.
recession is, but that's a whole other conversation topic. Like what are you seeing in the robotics industry in 2023?
I think that the recession is just like a fallacy. I think people are out here talking about a recession, but I think in the real world, I'm personally not seeing any signs of recession. The only version that I see of a recession is people cannot get employees. Like that's the version of a recession. And there's some economical things with that. Like, now we're having to pay higher salaries for maybe lower skilled jobs like McDonald's, which might cause disruption and stuff like that. But that's like a whole other thing. Like as of right now, like I would say we're in the past. We had seen a lot more of we want to install this or we want to install this in July, or we want to install this in a December shutdown, and we want to kick off the project maybe in July. Now it's more of a conversation of as soon as we get approval, we want to kick this thing off, and we want you to install this as quickly as you can. And let's map out some time where we can make this install happen, right? And whereas like before, it was like I seen a lot more of like, let's wait for the summer shutdown, let's wait for the Christmas shutdown for installation. To now, it's like let's and also too, the issuing of POs was kind of in alignment with that more so. So like if you had a project that was going to be a 6-month long project, they were talking about installing in December, so they're issuing a PO in July, and now it's more of we want to issue a PO today and then just get this thing installed as soon as your lead times will allow for it.
Right. And do you see that across the board? Do you see, a lack of like operators, machinists, electricians, techs, engineers, managers? Like, do you see it across the board? Do you see like certain maybe
Sure.
careers or people in demand a bit more in the manufacturing space?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely everywhere, but you do see it much more on like the production operator side of things.
Okay. Okay.
It's manufacturers really struggling to get their product out the door, which for the most part relies on, the operator. I mean, then you have like CNC companies too, though, that are, struggling to get, younger people in and people with skill, who are skilled. And that I think that we're experiencing two different things, right? There's the aftermath of COVID that changed working culture, I believe, where now people have like took that time off and like, I don't need to go back to work, or maybe it was a husband and wife situation. Maybe they were both working and they both weren't working. And then they said, well, you know what? Why don't you just go back to work? I'll stay at home and do things. Like that's just one scenario, but I think there's a lot more of those things going on that definitely change like why we're seeing a shortage in workers, right? Like people are just not going to go back to work for like those production type of jobs. And then the other situation is more of that, the older generation retiring, and there's just not people to fill those positions on some of the more skilled trade items.
It's an interesting dilemma. I've been trying to get answers. Obviously, I don't have the answer to what is going to need to happen to change this. I think that salaries increasing will certainly help, but I still feel that there's going to be a lack of people, again, for one reason or another, going into manufacturing. Like, right, as unfortunate as it is, I think automation will need to pick up, because I think in other countries, right, if you look at like China and Taiwan, things are a lot more automated than here in the US, and we're slowly now catching up. And I think it's going to help with those employee shortages. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, because I think it's also going to require a different skill set in the workforce, right, as we put out automation on the plant floors. But
yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of to dive in a little bit to like the financial side of like the economy and whatnot. The thing that I see that's kind of scary is the fact that like if you put a McDonald's wage at $18 an hour, and then you want to hire somebody to be like an intro, like brand new, fresher CNC operator, right? At one point in time, you could hire that person to $8 an hour, $12 an hour, and he's starting off by kind of sweeping the floors at first, or he's starting off by, maybe he's still in high school, or maybe he's in college, and they're gaining that real world experience. That business is getting the benefit of having, a more affordable laborer, and it's like a win-win situation, right? And now it becomes challenging, because unless you have like somebody who has the initiative, you could essentially go work at McDonald's and make more money than if you went and worked for, a CNC machine shop, which.
Yeah. And I was going to say, like, I don't think we always articulate how to say like the benefits of learning CNC machining and what it's going to help you do, let's say in 5 years. So people obviously, and again, I can't blame the people. I usually blame like the environment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But we don't sell, I think, the manufacturing industry well enough. And by we, I mean, the producers and the integrators and what have you. But ultimately, the person just chooses, well, what's the easier job, right? Like they're not thinking like, well, this job is going to allow me to grow so much further in 5 years and have a very, like stable environment. It's going to be great, a lot of opportunities, versus like, hey, I'm just going to do something much easier. And I'm not saying, McDonald's is much easier, but I'm saying maybe from like a demand standpoint, it's kind of the choice that they make. But anyways, it's interesting. I'm curious to see how it's going to go.
Yeah. And also too, like, we talked about this a little bit off camera, but I have a cousin and a brother who are not really interested in robotics. Right. And, what I want to get at there is like, for me, I'm really trying to push to them like, hey, like, do you want to make $30+ an hour in your career? Here's a clear defined path where you can do it, ... and you'll make $30+ an hour. And, there's like a hesitancy there. And I think some of it's generational, and I think some of it too is just like, you just don't, at the younger age, you don't, see the importance of like choosing a path, go down that path, and then decide later what you want to do, right? Like, I would highly suggest if somebody doesn't know what they're doing, like I'll use our industry for an example, because you can get out of college and make good money, right? People are coming out of community colleges with a 2-year degree making like 26+ an hour, doing like PLC, robot programming, mechanical engineering. And so, those type of positions, or what, going back a little bit, going through that process of education, 2 years of time, which is a very small amount of time. By the time somebody's 20 years old, they can have the ability to make $26 an hour for the rest of their life.
Yep.
Do that. When you get out of college, if you don't want to do it at all, don't do it. Whatever. It's only 2 years. But if you spend 4 years not knowing what you're doing, and then you decide you're going to do something, and then you do something, and let's say, for instance, like, this is something my mom did personally. She went to like beautician school, right? She gets out of beautician school, takes whatever it was, 1-2 years for that, and gets out making $14 an hour. And if people don't think about that, like, what is the outcome of like this training and whatnot that I'm going to do, then it's going to set them up to potentially not be in a very good spot financially, and in reality, like, that affects life too, like your happiness of life, your quality of life.
Yeah, and I would agree. Like I said, I think, drawing from my experience, I really think that manufacturers are going to have to kind of put a foot forward and try and reach people at a younger age. Again, in my experience, let's say when I was in high school, there were some like career conversations, but they were mostly within, the educational system. Like, oh, you're going to go and get this degree or that degree. And they would explain in general, what the professions were. But I've never had like a plant tour at the age of, like 14 to like 16, for example, because for me, and that was, I wanted to mention this, like the beginning of my career was when I stepped foot at the Procter and Gamble like facility for my interview. And again, they're very secretive about the environment for whatever reason. They don't want to expose their secrets, so they don't put out any video. So I couldn't find anything. But if you request a tour and you have an interview, you can freely go in there and see everything that they're doing, right? And once I stepped foot on that production floor, I'm like, this is where I want to go. You know what I mean? Because I saw the robots, I saw the drives, I saw, the smart people that were putting all those systems together, how the process, it was like, again, like it's a simple comparison, but it's how it's made, like seen in real life. And, like even how it's made, like they zoom in on the little things and they don't always paint the whole picture, like an entire plant. So I think it's super impressive. And I think that manufacturers need to do a lot more of that with the younger generation to sort of attract them. And to your point, like even on the salaries, like really be open with them. And I think those numbers are out there, right? Like you can find what the salary is, like at this position, at that position, and what it takes to progress. If they choose engineering, like here's where you get in. If you want to just right out of high school, you can become like a line operator. If you want to become a mechanic, a tech, like whatever, they can paint you that picture. And I guess it's still surprising to me that it's still that unclear. You know what I mean? Like it's still not as like easily understood at those ages as it is, let's say, for me today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at it, it's like even today, like we're doing maybe one manufacturing tour, or how do you call that? What do you field trip? Yeah, there you go. That was the word. So like we're doing one manufacturing field trip a year, and it's not enough exposure, right? Like, why are we only doing like one manufacturing trip a year? Why is it only one company? That to me, in my mind, like it should be almost like a monthly thing. Like that thing is so powerful and impactful to people's lives. Like this is where it's more of a structure change. And like, we got to think about like the way our education system is, because we really need to go and be exposed to that on a monthly basis or a bi-weekly basis, or, you know what I mean? Like, and not even just manufacturing, but like going into doctor's offices, going into like having more of these things where we're spending, our time in actual real world workforces and understanding like what the real world looks like. Just to kind of like quick fire on a couple things. Some people get done with mechanical engineering and they say, oh, well, I didn't know I was gonna have to work on a computer that long. You're like, well, what do you think you're getting into, buddy? And like, what's the other one? Oh, going inside of a manufacturing facility and touring them. And like, say, for instance, they have a high amount of automation. Like that's also another thing for the manufacturer. That's a value add to bring people into your company, is that, if somebody walks into your facility, you do a tour and they see all kinds of robot movement, that can potentially excite them to want to join your company.
Of
And
course. Yep.
in my mind, it's so powerful. Like today, like 10 plus years of experience in the industry, gone into hundreds of manufacturing facilities. When I walk into a facility and still see a bunch of robots moving around, I see like a BIW line where there's, four robots putting the car together, like four robots doing all the welding, like all that collaborative motion. I'm still just like mind blown and impressed by it after all these years. And if I'm still feeling that way about it, then I know somebody that's just seen it for the first time is going to feel that way.
Absolutely. Look, Balaka, I think me and you are on the same page on this. I think that I've never had a boring plant tour. I think it's always, how to say it, like, I'm always fascinated with what can be done, right? Because I think every factory does it in a different way. The setup is different. There's always very cool things to learn. To your point, it also, there's a lot of opportunities inside of manufacturing I didn't even know like existed, right? So, something as simple, let's say you want to have a career in finance, right? Well, there's a financial controller in every single plant, right?
Yep.
There's going to be some kind of like a bookkeeper or like a manager. There's going to be
Mhm.
somebody in quality, right? So if you go into, different degrees, like for example, not medical, but like let's say biology or any like
Yeah.
lab kind of like degree, like, well, there's opportunities of that in manufacturing, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so I think manufacturing really englobes so many different jobs that are critical. And I think there's just like at that early stage in your life, you don't know what's possible. And so I'll be honest with you, when I was finishing up my electrical engineering degree, I didn't know what I was going to do, right? Like I had zero idea. I didn't know if I was going to program things, if I was going to create circuits. I remember, memorizing motor load equations, thinking that's what I was going to do. And it was completely useless to say the least. But, anyways, I didn't know what the job was going to entail before I stepped foot, in the first job.
Yeah, absolutely. And take us back to kind of what your first job was.
Mhm. Sure. So initially, like to paint you a picture, when I graduated in 2013, late spring, I moved from Montreal, Canada to Los Angeles, California, and I didn't have a network, I didn't have any connections. I had my family there, so I moved closer to them, and I started applying everywhere. Right, like I was just going on the portals at the time. I think LinkedIn was around, but I had zero presence there. So
Yeah.
I started just sending out my resume through the portals, interviewing for various roles. My initial first role was at Mitsubishi Electric doing field work for
Mm.
elevators and escalators. And ironically, that was a desk job, right? So it was the title was field engineer, but I was doing a lot of the paperwork to figure out
Mm.
what the installers needed to put in each systems. And so, I guess to break that down a little bit, the Mitsubishi US company was getting the elevators from Mitsubishi Japan, and we needed to make sure that the configurations were wired correctly, right? So if it's an elevator with, I don't know, LCD displays versus like touch buttons versus like incandescent,
Mm.
what LED, whatever. So I was massaging paperwork to make sure that the installers were getting the right information in the field, and that was the field engineer job. But during that time, and I guess to maybe how I got into manufacturing, I had also interviewed in that summer for Procter and Gamble, and I know this now because I went through the process. What they typically did, at least back then, is they would get a pool of engineers, and then once they had different openings in various facilities, they would bring you on to like an on-site interview for a second round. And obviously, if you passed the interview and you were happy with the job offer, you were given a place at the facility. So what happened was I had the first interview in the summer, and they only called me back in February of like next year. So it's a quite a long turnaround process, which is also, has its own downsides, I suppose. But anyways, so they called me back in February. They're like, "Hey, we have an opening in this facility out of Auburn, Maine. Are you interested?" I, to be again like quite honest with you, was bored of the paperwork. I like the people at Mitsubishi, but the paperwork was a little bit not what I expected as an engineer.
Yeah.
So I flew out to the manufacturing facility, state of the art robotics, like I told you, like servos, things
Mm.
are being made at speeds, unlike anywhere else in the world. I walked through the facility. All right, like 2 week notice to Mitsubishi, guys. I'm moving to Maine, right? And so they moved all my belongings to Maine, which weren't that many at the time. I was, fairly fresh out of school,
Yeah.
and started working in manufacturing, right? And that was, I want to say, like my first like real like engineering job. People were extremely smart. The projects were very interesting, like high cost, high impact. I would also say fairly stressful at the time, so a lot of responsibility. But I've certainly learned a lot, right? Like I learned a lot in the field. As I've mentioned a little bit earlier, I didn't know what a PLC was. I had
Mm,
never seen those types of like servo drives and systems. So it was quite a learning curve at the beginning.
gotcha. And what did you start off doing?
So my official title was PCNIS, so Process Control and Instrumentation Systems, as an engineer. At the very beginning, I'll be honest with you, it was just helping out on startups. So they would be bringing in like various case packing machines, and I was just, making sure the checks are done, sort of like managing the electricians and looking at them, like what they're verifying, understanding the systems with senior engineers, right? So the first 3 to 6 months, honestly, I was just learning. I think there was, like I said, a lot of different systems. So the senior engineer would, for example, program a new way of packaging the boxes, right? And he would explain to me like, this is why we're doing this. This is how it's done. Here's where I adjust the speed of the machine for this servo drive. Here's where I'm making the adjustment on like a vision system. And so for the first 6 months, just learning for the most part. And then I had a chance to participate in larger projects. So I want to say the biggest project right after that learning curve was deploying a new line. So my boss at the time, extremely technical, was kind of the lead on the project, and he was commissioning all that equipment during the day shift, and I was coming in on nights and making sure, again, we're validating the right checks. I was at that time a little bit more proficient in PLC code. I wouldn't say that I programmed anything from scratch at that point, but I would still like validate, like, oh, like how are the tags doing? Can I trend the tag? Like, is this what we expect? If there's any failure, I had to sort of figure out where it went. And after that, so that was like 6 months again. After that 6 months, then I led the next installation of a line. And that involved, at that point now communicating with the vendor, and they would tell us, hey, we can't find like this version of this piece of hardware anymore. What do you want to do? Right. And it's making those little decisions and then
Yeah.
bringing that equipment back to the US, installing it and commissioning everything.
Mm. That's a pretty big amount of responsibility that early on.
I'll be honest with you, like looking back, it was very overwhelming, right? Like, so it was very tough, but also, like I said, I had no choice, right? Like I had to learn,
Right.
I had to stay like late hours to kind of learn the systems on my own. I had to go back to resources. I went to, like the Rockwell courses. I had good relationships with the vendors, so I would ask them, quite frankly, a lot of those questions. So it wasn't a walk in the park by any stretch of the word. It was very stressful, right? Like going to vendors, like I had to.
Yeah.
The first one, like I said, it was with my boss. So we went to Italy, we went to Japan to look at the equipment before it was signed off to be shipped to the US. Obviously, the first time you do one of those VATs or FATs, it's very stressful, but you learn, right? And you see how
Yeah.
things are not as perfect as you would like them to be in
Yeah.
the real world, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's I guess like drawing back to our conversation on engineering, I think the expectations that I had is that engineers are like perfect, everything goes well, you have the
Yeah.
specifications, they come out, the builder creates a machine based on the specifications, you receive the machine and it's running, right? The
Yeah. Yeah.
reality could not be further from that, right? You have to adjust things, you have to figure out like
Mhm.
how can we do things differently. So, anyways, all that to say, it was a challenging time, but I learned quite a bit.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that learning experience that you got there, like, was probably one of those things that like advanced you along in your knowledge, like many more years than a lot of people would have the exposure to get that much experience that quickly.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm very thankful for that experience. I ended up moving from PNG after 3 years. I can certainly share the reasons, I guess, but at the time, how to say it, I think it wasn't the right decision, right? Like if I was
Mm.
to reflect on that, I think I should have had more conversations with my management teams, and that's one of the pieces of advices that I give to younger engineers in their careers. I think that for a number of reasons, you either think like, oh, things are not moving fast enough or things are moving too slow. You start to be either like bored at the job, or you want to seek out like
Right.
different opportunities, and you don't have those conversations with your immediate managers. And at
Mm-hmm.
some point you just get so fed up with how things are done that you, like I said, end up pulling the plug. But I think I should have had those conversations, and now that I'm a bit more mature,
Yeah.
I kind of look back and think like, hey, like maybe I could have changed some things to make it more in my favor. So um for what it's worth, to younger engineers, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's definitely valuable. Like have that open discussion. Because I think a
Yep.
lot of people, they'll just leave their position, right? Like, hey, can I get a raise? No, okay, peace. Yeah, like whereas like the conversation can just be much deeper. Okay, what is it going to take for me to get a raise? Oh, I can't get a raise. What is it going to take? Right? Maybe there's something I can do. Maybe some skill I can add. Maybe you know, and like just have that open negotiation.
Yeah,
For me,
and I think
for me, go ahead,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was gonna go ahead. I was gonna go off into another topic, kind of anyway. So
I was gonna like close that off by saying like, it also, it's not just the money. I think it's like engineers want to work on certain technologies. They want to like work on certain projects. And again, talking for myself at least, I wasn't good at communicating what I wanted to do in my like career trajectory, but I
yep,
could have done that better, and I could have gotten what I wanted, having stayed at that employer, right? But I kind of
right,
like built that in my head, and like, oh, like I'm not gonna have that opportunity, and
yeah.
so I'm just gonna go somewhere else that has it, right?
Yep.
So
Gotcha. So what was your next opportunity?
I moved to Kraft Heinz. So
Nice.
like one of the, I guess, other external reasons was that Maine is quite different from a large city, right? And having grown up in large cities, I couldn't find the same type of maybe environment that I was not thriving in, but I guess like looking forward to. Decided to move back to Los Angeles. I think at least for me, it was a better suited environment at the time, and so I joined Kraft Heinz in a maintenance manager role. So very different from engineering, but still, the way it was sold to me and what I was doing at the plant was still fairly technical, right? So um, obviously, different people in maintenance have different skill sets, but they wanted me for like that electrical expertise, which they didn't have at the time. But it was a different role because I was almost immediately put in charge of like 26 mechanics and technicians,
Mm,
and I needed to manage the pays, manage the schedules, and so that brought a whole other like host of, I want to say, like challenges that I was not
oh yeah.
exposed to before. I had to deal with the union, which again that also brings its own challenges.
Mm,
So again, I learned things, but I want to say there I learned more on how to work with people rather than like I didn't grew technically as much as I did on like the human aspects in that
gotcha.
role.
Gotcha. And then after what made you transition after that?
That's a good question. So back in 2015, you may or may not know this. So Kraft and Heinz was merged by a group out of Brazil and Berkshire Hathaway. So they made the merge in 2015. And so, as you can imagine, one of the main initiatives from like an accounting standpoint, which I now understand in part due to my MBA, was cost cutting. We're going to close down a few facilities. So as of 2018, they shut down that factory. And I
Mm,
want to tell you that there were signs that they were going that route at the management level even before that, right? So at the time, I was working with a consultant slash integrator that was supporting that facility. And he noticed that I had a lot more knowledge on the technical side than a typical, like I said, like maintenance management requires a lot of, like I said, that human aspect, but
people,
I
yeah.
had more of the technical skills from P&G. And so he said, like, hey, if the plant closes, I'd like to offer you an opportunity to go do systems integration work all across the US. So that's kind of the decision I had made at the time. I spoke to my managers at Kraft, and they said like, yeah, that sounds like a great opportunity. We're not certain how long they're going to keep the plant open. And again, that's a decision they make at the accounting level, the finance
Yeah.
level. So it was certainly outside of our, how to say it, like pay grade, if you want to say
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
that way. So.
Yeah. absolutely. And then how long did you end up sticking with that company?
So close to 3 years. I still keep in good. I'm in still a very good relationship with that previous boss. He's a great mentor of mine, extremely smart, especially on like the Allen Bradley side. Like I said, we did integration work across the U.S. I was flying to Georgia, every 2 weeks. Essentially, I would do like 2 weeks. I would have a weekend off back in LA, then fly back again for 2 weeks. An entire plant commissioning project. So there too, I learned quite a bit. The company was very small, right? So I was employee number one at the time. So I had an opportunity to almost like choose the platforms, like select the parts, and
Mm,
I want to say, that's the difference between, let's say, a very highly corporate company and
mm,
kind of like a small systems integration firm. You get to make a lot of those decisions, and you get to try again, like different controllers, different platforms, different sensors you can choose, right? Versus a
right.
highly standardized plant, you're kind of like locked in. There's a lot of
Hmm.
paperwork, there's a lot of approvals. And so, to the earlier conversation of P&G, at some point you're like, oh man, like I don't want to do all this paperwork, I just want to do
Yeah.
the technical things. And so
Yeah.
that's what that job really allowed me to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, me personally, like I've spent my entire career in system integration and also with a smaller company. So it was nice being able to uh, like have that freedom and also too, like really when I started with the company, they had really just started getting into robotic cells. I mean, they were doing
Mhm.
like robotic service and on-site programming and things like that for like 10 years before I had joined. But after I had joined the company, they were just in the phases of doing like their first couple capital projects with robotics. And so the team was made, primarily made of strong engineers. Even the owner had a ton of years of experience in vision and in FANUC robot programming, and really what the business was based off of. But they also didn't have like much of a structure as far as like we use Allen Bradley PLCs. We're going to use like
Mhm.
ANT modules, and like this is how we're going to design every cabinet. It was like every cabinet was different, and like so that was one thing where like I really had the ability to like step in as a leader and kind of help mold like the direction of like where the company was going engineering wise, and say like, guys, like we need to standardize the way we build cabinets. Like, why are we doing this different every single time? Like, and some of it started off originally as like frustrations of being the guy that had to wire things or something like that, or program things. Like, guys, I have to redo this from scratch every single time because all the IOs mapped out differently. Like, why is this like this? And also too, like being a little bit younger and seeing like technological advancements and stuff like that. Like, I I was excited about using the newer technologies. Like back then, this is when like Ethernet IP and like more connected devices was becoming a thing. Like I think during this period of time is like whenever like FANUC released like SIP safety for the robots, and being able to communicate safety signals from PLC to robot over Ethernet. And I'm like, guys, this is powerful. Like we're doing stuff with DCS zones, and we're like having to uh, hardwire all the connections. And if we want to change something, then we have to like rewire something or add more wires or whatever it may be, right? And so like having this like programming ability to just like change some program code and be good, like was an exciting and fun
Yeah,
thing to
of
do.
course. You get a lot more leeway, right? Like when you're sort of like a smaller systems integrator versus, like I said, a corporate environment. I would say, and this is maybe like people disagree with me on this, but I like how to say, like as an engineer, I like to create things. And
Mm,
so when we've already solved a problem one way, in some aspects, I like to say, like, hey, can we solve it in a different way using like a different piece of technology, right? And so I
yeah,
understand there's a need to standardize. I understand that, like, obviously it makes things simpler, but I think there's also opportunity to be had in trying things and maybe they do work out in your favor, right? So just
yeah,
because we've done this project 10 times
mm,
on like Alan Bradley, hey, maybe we try this on, let's say, like a Siemens Opto Phoenix, whatever, on this 11th time. And I understand that there's a potential to fail, but maybe there's also potential to learn how this platform is like
right,
better or more suited for this application. So I think, a lot of times on LinkedIn you'll see the saying like use the right tool for the job. And I've thought about this a lot. I think like there's many tools that can be used for the same job in the
Yep.
space, right? I think the analogy of like hammer for a nail is not necessarily correct, because you can use many platforms to accomplish the same tasks. And I think
Right.
you should experiment with a couple to see what works better, what works worse. You know, they all have their own, how to say, like, peculiar maybe differences. But anyways, I guess, like, to come back to the original like conversation, I think in a small integrator you can do those things, right? Like as an engineer, and that's the exciting part, right? Like you're almost like an artist at the same time as you are like a technical person, which you
Yeah.
don't realize that's what you're going to be doing. But anyways, to me, that's what kept the things really cool, versus, like I told you, the story of
Yeah.
like the first experiences where everything was very standard. You couldn't do anything outside of those boundaries, and you had to use the same platforms just because, you know, a vice president has signed a
Yeah.
contract for the next like 10 years. But
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I like the fact that you're saying like just don't standardize and just leave the standard and make it the same standard for like the next 10, 20 years. Like
yeah,
let's change things. Cause like one of our like initiatives that we always are striving for in our company is like remote accessibility. Like how can we service this thing remotely, do program changes? Like, so like we're, you know, when we implement systems, like we install all the software packages that give us the ability to remote program at the highest level that we can. We're exploring new products that, like, you know, if you can log into the web browser interface and you can see the IO statuses and stuff like that in this one unit, but in this other one you can actually write the program. We want the one where we can write the program. And then so from there, we're like analyzing like cost justification. Like, okay, well, this one costs $1,000 more than this other one. Like, kind of like weighing out those things and like pushing the envelope on how like we can support things remotely.
yeah, absolutely. And again, like to your point, that was one of my like frustrations with the larger companies. I couldn't try. Like I'll give you one example. We were heavily standardized on Cognex for vision systems, and I'm like, hey, like, you know, I found like Keyence, I found like
Yeah.
Banner, and I would like to try these systems, and I was pretty much like told no by the management team, right? Because we are
Yeah.
standardized this one platform,
And
but I think
Cognex.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of opportunities. And
Yeah.
again, like as you said, they offer different things. Why not
Yep.
try them out, right? But anyways, that's
Yeah. Yeah. And also too, like it's the gap is closing a little bit, but especially like, you know, 5 years ago, like you had a Keyence and you had a Cognex. One thing that I always said about like Keyence and Cognex, because I also did quite a bit with vision, is they're both good products, and they're basically both the same. However, each one of them tended to have a product line that was like really good at something, right? Like, you know, like back then, like Keyence, I think they launched like their aluminum track system, right? And like that was like one of their new brown breaking like products that they released. And so it was like 2D vision, but you were able to get 3D data, right? And so like those
yeah.
things were opening up new tools and abilities to be able to do inspections on applications that you weren't able to do. And same for Cognex. Cognex had its own you know, versions of like software tools that gave you different capabilities to automate applications that you weren't able to automate.
And see, you know, like I didn't get a chance to kind of look at those tools at the time, right? Because I think obviously the vendors are going to tell you, well, like it's basically the same. When like you should stick to us, and it's going to be great. But as an engineer, I want to experience that for myself, right? Like let me integrate a
Yeah.
project with this. Let me see for myself. Let me design a tool and kind of see where it's going to either succeed or fail. Like I want to, how to say it, for better for worse, try it out, see what it is, and make my own conclusions, right? Like I hate being told like, oh, it's the same thing, so you shouldn't even bother investing the time. Because I think again, a lot of engineers get pigeonholed by their employer into like a platform, whether
Yeah.
like on the robotics too, right? Like you have so many different vendors, and obviously I don't know the distinctions between all of them, but they do offer different tools, they do offer different
Yep.
capabilities. And I think it's just how to say it, like having the capability to say, well, let's try it out, like in the next project. Maybe it's gonna fail, right? Like I'm not saying that it's for sure going to be a success, but our engineers going to get like a knowledge, like I guess,
Mhm.
the understanding of that platform, maybe it's going to work for other projects,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Yeah.
anyways, that's my opinion. Obviously, things
Yeah.
in the
Absolutely.
business world, and I understand that too, need to be done differently.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. I mean, and I also think that like there has to be a level of, let's say, R&D. Like let's call like the scenario that you just explained. Like we'll do this as an R&D type thing. Sure. Like let's anticipate losing money on this to do this other way, to try out something new that might give us a leverage into the future.
yeah, exactly. And again, there's so many technologies coming out right now. I think the smartest manufacturers will spend that like
Mhm.
R&D money. And obviously, again, I don't think me and you are saying just kind of throw money out the door
Yeah.
expecting nothing. I think the conversation is like, well, we have a predictable project. Let's try a new tool that we know is similar, close enough, so that we
Yep.
gain the understanding, so that we can see, well, maybe it can be
Mhm.
applied in other applications in our facility, right? So
Yep.
it's a calculated risk, right? It's an
Mhm.
R&D project, it's a learning opportunity, but it's a calculated risk. And so even if the failure happens, we already know we can always buy the previous platform and have it even on standby,
Yep.
if the engineer says, well, look, we just can't figure it out, or it's not going to work. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing that I see industry wise that like is slightly scary for like, especially for the company itself. I don't know how like much it's going to actually impact the industry. I think it's more that competition will essentially put companies out of business. So like as we navigate more into an automated world, and as younger people are coming into the space, people are going to be thinking about how can we do this process in an automated way from the get-go, right? And so like what I'm seeing is that a lot of manufacturers, let's go back 20 years, whenever somebody says, this kind of ties in what we was talking about, like 20 years ago, somebody said, let's try a robot. And they said, oh no, not a robot. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and maybe it was like some small technological shift, or like, hey, let's put a conveyor here. A conveyor? Why would we do that? Like, but like as the technologies, have grown, or like let's put some type of line tracking on this, or a servo motor on this instead of just an inductive motor. Like, not creating that shift and like making those like small investments in like R&D, or just, the progression like technologies. What I'm seeing is like a lot of companies that just don't have like any automation at all. And looking at their process, like they either their company has gotten to a point where like they're really not profitable enough to really invest in automation. It's like they're kind of stuck in a hard spot, right? Like they can't really invest in automation because now they're so far behind that like they're not as competitive. Their production rates are not as high. They have like older equipment that is 20 plus years old that may make it extremely difficult to automate. Whereas like maybe there's configurations of that equipment now that is more automatable. I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head, but there's a lot of processes that whenever you're going with like your initial procurement of a piece of machine, like a stamping machine or an injection molding machine, CNC machines, any type of machines like that, right? Like if the initial procurement that you buy doesn't have like things built into it, that make it easier to be able to automate and communicate with, then now you're very, very limited, right? Like if you look at like CNC machines 20 years ago, didn't have Ethernet IP, or is very limited amount of CNCs that had Ethernet IP. And so now you're, having to use some protocol that maybe you can't even really get the cable, and you have to hand build the cable, if you can even do that, right? To be able to interface with that piece of equipment. And that's one of the challenges that I'm seeing, like with some manufacturers. Like they're so old now that like, it's like, what do you do? Like they're kind of stuck in a hard spot. And like some of these companies, like they're within like probably a year or two of like, if they don't make an investment now, that like over the next 5-10 years, definitely 20 years, like they'll be out of business because somebody else is procuring equipment that's ready to be automated, and they're buying that piece of equipment knowing that they're already going to put a robot on it, right? There's people buying CNC machines that already have robotic arms on them, or have plans to put a robotic arm on them to tend that machine. And yeah,
I'll be honest with you. I think it also creates an opportunity for maybe like the younger generation to come in, acquire some of these manufacturing facilities, and then bring in the automation that would provide the
mhm,
ROI, right? Like
yep,
I always like to see on the positive side. So I think if someone's
yeah,
unwilling, or how to say it, doesn't see the benefit in automating their facility,
hmm,
more power to them, right? Like they can
right,
sell that off to someone who's going to buy it for pennies on the dollar, retrofit what they need to retrofit, add the automation, make sure that everything is up to 2023 at least like standards.
yeah,
And I think that there's a ton of opportunity. I think it's just
yeah,
you need the right maybe like skill set, or and also the right partner, right? Like I
hmm,
think that it's difficult also to find partners that would come in, do a good assessment of the facility, understand to some extent your business slash process, and propose solutions that make sense, right? I don't think that there's, how to say it, like too many of those either. So I think it
yeah,
takes time to build that relationship. It takes time for that vendor to get up to speed, to
yep,
understand, what you can buy from like a monetary standpoint, what you're trying to make better from like a bottleneck, maybe like process standpoint, and then ultimately kind of figure out the solutions for you along the way. So
yeah.
anyways, I personally see it as a positive because it's going to open up some opportunities for me. But look,
Yeah,
I agree with you.
absolutely. One of the small reasons why I started an automation company is kind of for that reason. At some point in time, after we grow out our presence in automation enough that we're gonna start the acquisition of like manufacturing facilities, and that'll be like our core focus is acquiring companies that have a ton of like manual labor and there's just tons of opportunity out there, right? Of companies that can be converted.
Absolutely. And I think, people also maybe sometimes get lost in these, to take it on the opposite side of the spectrum. When you go to like a conference or you talk to certain, I want to say like hardware or software OEMs, I think the picture is that we're trying to deploy AI, we're trying to deploy machine learning. I think there's a lot of still like low hanging fruit and opportunities at kind of like the lower ends of automation, right? Like, so process again, right now people are having trouble finding people to palletize cases, right? And I think like that's so easy to calculate what the
Yeah,
value is there. And I think they're just stuck thinking, hey, how can we add artificial intelligence? How can we add these like data analysis tools? And data is important, right? Like I talk about data all the time,
hmm,
but I think it also doesn't make sense to go from we're a completely manual operation to we are now a complete lights off, fully out. There's just like robots
yeah,
driving around like facility.
yeah,
There's steps, and I think there's still a lot of opportunities at the non like very high tech, so to speak,
sure.
ends of automation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of there's so like we don't necessarily do a ton of consulting, but like there's a high level of manufacturing facilities that could utilize more consulting services to kind of drive that plan, like help navigate and really take the time to research and define what their automation process looks like, and really like be their you know automation advisor, because there's so many things to automate, right? But like all obviously it goes back to the business side of things of like, does this present an ROI? How fast is the ROI? What's the risk involved with this application? Like, it doesn't matter if you automate a process that has 6 people if your success rate is like 50% on whether it's going to work or not. You're much better off like automating where there's 1 person and you have 100% success rate. Um, so like there's so many small things that like I think like through consulting that companies could see like a huge benefit, and especially like just planning and mapping out like their automation roadmap so that they could have like a 2 to 5 year plan of what that looks like, and then start working on some type of like a budgeting and execution of that plan.
Yeah, and they're challenging problems, right? Like, let's be honest here. It takes a lot of like effort. It takes industry knowledge. It takes a lot of kind of sitting through conversations with that manufacturing plant to truly understand, where the problems and where do the opportunities lie. And it's not an easy task. So to my like previous point, I think it's difficult to find people capable of doing that.
Hmm.
But once you get the right partner, once you get the right strategy, I certainly think there's a lot of opportunities. But it requires a certain, I want to say, like expertise in that area.
Absolutely. Vlad, I think I've kept you long enough. Do you have any last valuable points that you want to add to the community?
Well, look, Malak, I really appreciate the conversation. I really enjoy conversations around manufacturing automation. I really hope that, again, we talked about manufacturers sort of creating a better environment, sort of communicating better to the younger generation. I think over the long run, we can solve the problem of lack of labor, but I really hope that it comes from all angles. So I just want to thank
Absolutely.
you for having me on the conversation, and I hope that our community keeps the same flow of information going.
Absolutely. Vlad, thank you for being here today. And where can people find you at?
They can find me on LinkedIn primarily, so I'm very responsive. If you want to ask me any questions, we've talked a lot about content. We've talked about manufacturing automation. If you want to reach out, more than happy to have a conversation. My main, I guess, place of activities, solusplc.com. We have a lot of
Mhm.
trainings on various platforms. Always looking for instructors, and yeah, anyone interested in content for automation, always happy
Yeah,
to
sure.
talk to them.
Yeah, give us a quick rundown of what type of content do you have on Solus PLC?
Yeah, so as I've kind of explained, I have a very deep knowledge of Allen Bradley systems primarily, and so that's what we focused on at the very beginning. At this point, we also cover Siemens, PLC Next, and we cover that both in technical written tutorials because I think like video is great, and we have video courses, we have video tutorials on YouTube. I still think that written content is good for some of the technical materials. So we have written, we have video on all those platforms. As I mentioned, we're looking to bring in robotics. So now we have an introduction to FANUC. You can certainly be the judge of that. It's not in my domain, but we are looking to cover a little bit more of advanced topics in that area as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah,
Cool.
definitely anybody who's watching, go check out his website. I think it's super valuable. Like it's we didn't touch on it too much, but it's one of those things like you can take his courses and really get up to speed on your knowledge and experience with PLCs and really have a leg up on the next engineer that you're competing with.
We're always trying to improve, right? We're always trying to get feedback. We're trying to understand where the industry is going. I think that nobody's perfect, and certainly we are trying to, take the right steps to build out a better curriculum than others. But we're slowly on the pathway there, right? There's a lot of people in the industry that are doing similar things, and they certainly have their place. Everyone has their take, and if they, as I said, enjoy what we've put together, more than happy
Mhm.
to have a conversation
Yeah.
and yeah, but appreciate everything, Malachi.
Thank you, Vlad. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank
Malachi.
you. See ya.
Take care.